Bend Around the Wind by Skylia. Chapter 75, Earth-Dwelling Friends. It was close to dawn the next day when Loki finally bid goodbye. Thor insisted he could stay some more, but Loki declined. He needed to go back to Stark, and not just to reassure the man that everything was fine. This day left him raw, cut open, vulnerable. It felt like things buried deep within him were dragged and torn out of him to the surface for everyone to see. In a way, it felt like he got rid of some horrible burden that was eating away at him, but it also left him without something he desperately clung to in recent years. He knew things were far from settled, that this was not the last time he would need to bare his soul in a way he never thought he would be able to in front of Thor, not unless it was to spit venomous words in his face. But here they were. They spoke of things they've never spoken of before, shared thoughts they kept hidden from all others. It was surreal and utterly exhausting. When he arrived back to Stark's house, Jarvis wisely refrained from greeting him because Stark was asleep. Loki moved before he really thought about it and climbed into the bed, curling up next to the man, soaking in his presence, just breathing in his scent. Feeling Stark's heartbeat under his hand grounded him. The heat of his body and his even breaths helped him breathe more easily again. His mind was clearing right away, and the tightness in his chest eased up a little as well. Stark stirred not even a minute later. His arms moved to wrap around Loki even before he was fully awake. "Hey," he croaked then, his voice scratchy from sleep. Loki didn't answer, just breathed deeply and let the familiar feel of Stark's body help him relax some more. Stark tightened his hold on him right away and pulled him closer. Loki buried his face in his neck. "Do I need to kill someone?" Stark asked quietly. Loki huffed and shook his head. Stark relaxed a little at that and started stroking Loki's back soothingly. He always knew what to give, even when Loki did not know how to ask for it. Right now, he just needed to be close. He felt wounded, not in a bad way, but still too defenseless. Tony was safe. "So, no need to murder anyone," Tony said after a very long silence. He obviously couldn't stay quiet any longer. "But for the record, I am so not afraid of Thor. I could totally kick his butt." Loki chuckled quietly because it was such a typical thing to say. But there was also lightness in Tony's tone, and that helped him relax further. He shifted until he lay on his side, his head resting on Tony's shoulder. "As entertaining as it would be to see you two brawling again," Loki said, "I'm just exhausted." "We'll sleep then," Tony decided. "You just need to tell me if you're not okay. I really need to know that, you know." "I am well. It was good," Loki said, testing out the word on his tongue. We'll be fine," he said. It was strange to say it. He never thought he would ever say it. Things with Thor were fine. It was hard to admit it, even harder to believe it was possible. Yet here it was. They would be fine. It really seemed that they would. It would take some time to get used to even the very thought. Tony smiled at him as he turned to face him. He looked happy, he looked relieved, but he did not say anything. He just leaned closer to capture Loki's lips in a kiss. They didn't hurry. They didn't need to. That was not the point. Of course, Loki always felt a deeply burning ache of lust whenever Tony kissed him, but this was not for foreplay. Tony kissed him for the kiss itself, kissed him long and deep, like if there was nothing he would rather be doing than this, than to stay so closely wrapped up in each other's arms and kiss just to reassure each other's existence. Tony was out of breath by the time they pulled apart, and Loki's lips were tingling from sensation. Tony just stared at him again and swept aside some dark locks that fell into Loki's face. "Thank you for talking to him," Loki said then, quiet and sincere. He still felt shaken after everything he needed to say when talking to Thor, but he did not want to forget this. Tony leaned closer again and kissed his forehead, then his lips, short and gentle becks. "Anytime," he said with another smile. "I mean it." "He said you lectured him," Loki said. "Damn straight I did," Tony agreed proudly. "And I was only like 25% terrified I was going to end up like Messy Fingerprint on the wall." Loki had to grin and laugh at that because Tony definitely hid his fear well. Thor most definitely did not notice it. He called you wise. Thor is too easy to impress then, Tony countered. You'd be surprised how untrue that is, Loki said. You just seem to have charisma even to rival his. I have an awesome fake it till you make it attitude going on for me. Tony shrugged. Stop it! Loki laughed again. You're just trying to make me praise you. You're saying there's nothing to praise about me? Tony asked. I'm not going to feed your ego, darling, Loki said. It's big enough as it is. Tony piped it and widened his big brown eyes so Loki shoved his face into the pillows and smothered him for a minute or two. Stark was giggling like a child when Loki finally let go of him to stand up and get undressed. Of course, the man just propped himself up to his elbow to watch him shed his clothes, still chuckling once in a while. So, he agreed? Stark asked then. He did, Loki nodded. Reluctantly, might I add, and he insists to always know where I am. That's not so bad, Stark said. He's probably also going to insist to come with me, Loki told him. That can be good. I mean, it could help, right? Depends. Loki shrugged, finally getting rid of his pants as well and getting back into bed. He undid his ponytail to make a braid out of it as he spoke. Once I've spoken to Frey, I'll know more. You seem really sure that he's gonna help, Stark said. If he needed me back so much that he sent Hatchet after me, then I assume my help will be worth him a favor or two, whatever it is he wants, Loki said. He lay down again when his braid was done, settling down comfortably. And I know him, he continued. If he wants something, he'll get it, and he won't mind paying a suitable price for it. At least Loki was sure he knew Frey well enough. He mainly had fond memories of his uncle, and he knew him to be a smart man. Things should go well enough with him. Stark spread out on the sheets, and Loki settled next to him, their bodies sliding closer until they were wrapped around one another again. I just don't like not knowing what he wants from you, Stark said, absently running a finger down Loki's arm. Which is why Hatchet and I are working on an alternate solution, Loki reminded him. And how's that going? Stark asked. Loki smiled. Oh, yes, they did not have time to talk about this yet. You'll see, he told him mysteriously, then gave him one more kiss. Now go back to sleep. Stark didn't argue, and he was fast asleep in a matter of minutes. It didn't take Loki long to follow suit. Loki assumed that the not-so-proper rest last night and their exciting morning was the reason why it took Stark over 3 hours to notice. Though he was not someone to brag. No, that was a lie. Sometimes he loved to brag, but he was still rather proud of how utterly undone Stark was that morning. The sight of him spread out on the bed, speechless, breathless, and blushed to a charming shade of red filled Loki with a very specific brand of satisfaction. Every time he thought of it, he just wanted to do it all over again. He was in a good mood. He always felt more ravenous when that was the case, and he never just hungered for food or drink. Where is Hatchet? Stark asked when he finally noticed. Loki looked up from his book for a moment. He'll want to meet some guests we're going to have, Loki said. Guests? Loki just hummed in confirmation. He could see from the corner of his eye how Stark paused for a moment, obviously taking notice of Loki's teasing tone. And the guests are? Stark prompted. Faye. Faye, indeed. Okay, so you found some Faye then. That's great, Stark said, finally walking closer. I would have appreciated more heads up, but it's fine. Anything I need to know? I think you already know the basics, so there is nothing to be concerned about, Loki told him. You just need to remember all those rules. Don't ask for their names and don't be rude, Stark guessed. Asking for their names is considered rude, but yes, Loki nodded. Nothing's more dangerous than an insulted Fae. Stark thought about that for a moment. I'm not sure I should be here for this one. It will be fine, Loki reassured him. Insulting people is sort of my thing, Loki. It's fortunate, then, that you're going to be on your best behavior, Loki said pleasantly, smiling up at him. I feel whipped, Stark grumbled. Loki chuckled. No such thing, darling, he said, then thought about it. Well, unless you want to be, I'm sure we can arrange something. He made sure his tone was dripping with filthy promises as he said the words. Stark obviously noticed because he grinned and leaned in to kiss him. "I'll pass," he said when he pulled away. "But I'm sure we can come up with something just as interesting." He raised his eyebrows suggestively. Loki set aside his book and pulled him down into a deeper kiss in answer. Stark had to kneel down on the couch, not to fall over. His body stayed well above Loki's. That wouldn't do. Loki pulled him down some more until Stark had to brace himself on the back of the couch, which basically put him right in Loki's lap. In other words, just where he wanted him. He loved how red and full Stark's lips looked when they pulled apart again, and his mind wandered back to that morning again. It wouldn't take much more for his trousers to become uncomfortably tight. "Be good, and I'll think of something special," Loki promised, then biting his lips in a way he knew looked enticing. "Oh, so we reached the bribing part of our relationship," Stark said. "You've been bribing me with gifts for years," Loki pointed it out. "Point," Stark agreed. "Besides," Loki continued, he gripped Stark's hips tightly with both hands, "it's more of a promise of reward than a bribe." He slowly slid his fingertips up and under Stark's t-shirt as he said that, and he was sure his intent was very clear on his face. The heat in Stark's gaze was answer enough. Stark grinned again and leaned in for another kiss. He finally let his full weight rest on Loki, sitting firmly down onto his lap. Loki lifted his hips up when he did so, then chuckled into their kiss when Stark let out a small groan of pleasure. Loki sensed the spike of magic in the air long before he heard anything, but he did not feel like pulling away from Stark, so he kept kissing him. Then, of course, Hatchet had to whistle and startle Stark. "I don't mind us," Hatchet said. Loki didn't need to look at him to hear the smirk in his tone. Stark huffed and got off of Loki, straightening his clothes. It was fortunate that neither of them were much for embarrassment. When Loki finally turned to look at Hatchet, he caught sight of their guests. Excellent. Stark seemed very surprised, though. One of them was standing on Hatchet's left shoulder, holding onto his hair for balance. He was the smaller one. He had light brown skin and ashen green hair. His ears were enormous, the earlobes frilly, the tips pointed. His eyes big and black and button-like. The other one was standing on the floor, but he still had a tight hold of Hatchet's pants. This one had white skin, even paler than Loki's and Hatchet's, and his hair was a messy mop of rusty red. The ears and the eyes were exactly the same as his companions, though. Loki was always astonished how such small bodies could contain so much magic. Even where he was standing, he could feel it. They did not need to cast any spells for it to vibrate in the air. Pixies were the same, but if given the choice, Loki would rather deal with any other sort of fae than pixies. "Oh, fae," Stark said then. "They're totally..." He cut himself off abruptly and continued with a different tone. "Exactly what I pictured. What are they again?" "They're gnomes, Stark," Hatchet said. "Allow me to introduce. This is Oakbud," he said, lifting the shoulder one of the gnomes was standing on. "And this is Billskin," he said then, gesturing at the white one by his feet. "Nicknames, of course," he added. "This is Loki. I've already told you about him," he continued, now speaking to the gnomes. "He's pretty," Oakbud chimed in a high voice. Stark blinked at that, but Loki was used to it. His pale skin and his tall and slender build were considered attractive among the fae, no matter which kind. He was also a mage, so they could feel his magical presence. "And this is Master Stark. This is his house. Say hello," Hatchet continued. "Hello," they said at the same time, their grins wide and sharp. That was something all fae had in common. Small fae always seemed to have really high or really low voices. These two had high voices, so they must have been relatively young then. "It is very nice of you to join us," Loki nodded in greeting, then sent Stark a pointed look. "Oh, yes, welcome. Nice to meet you." "Ooh, not stupidly human," Billskin said. "Of course he's not stupid. It's Iron Man. Don't you watch TV?" Uncle Bud asked. "Just because he has human smarts doesn't mean he has other smarts," Billskin replied. "He's a human." Uncle Bud rolled his eyes. "All of his smarts are human smarts." Okay, you two, Hatchet interrupted. Stark has smarts. We can agree on that. Moving on. Wow, all right, Stark said, staring at the two Smoldings. This feels slightly surreal, but you know who I am. That's great. Who on earth doesn't know who you are? Pillskin asked. We don't live under rocks, you know. I know a gnome once who lived under a rock, Oakbud said. Dirty bugger, but even he had cable. They're city gnomes, Hatchet said. They live in downtown Los Angeles. He obviously said it for Stark's benefit, for Loki already realized that. Gnomes always wore clothes and trinkets they made out of things they could get their hands on where they lived. Forest gnomes often wore mushroom hats, furs, and feathers. The ones who lived by the sea had shells, scales, and fish bones. These two had clothes made out of human clothing, and their trinkets were obviously human in origin as well. Pillskin's silver belt looked like it was once a watch, and Oakbud had golden rings on his tiny wrists and small colorful gems on his clothes used as buttons, jewels lost by humans, most likely. Should we introduce them to the others too? Stark asked. Might as well. Hatchet shrugged and leaned down to scoop Pillskin up from the floor. The gnome squeaked indignantly, but Hatchet paid him no mind, just held him under his arm. Oakbud laughed at the other gnome from his perch on Hatchet's shoulder. Stark and Loki followed them out of the room. So that not being rude thing, he asked quietly. Hatchet's different. He's a fae as well, at least where it counts. They treat their own kind differently than others. Loki informed him. Okay, now tell me how two tiny gnomes can help you, he asked. Gnomes know everyone. They're very well informed, and they're not as hard to deal with like some other fae folk. So we're making friends, Stark said. Yes, we're making friends, Loki agreed. Mostly they just needed inside information, but knowing some local gnomes could only help on the long run. Introductions were amusing, to say the least. When they found Bruce and Drongo, Oakbud put up his hands and screamed, French monster! And Pillskin started chanting, Smash! 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 Excitedly. Okay, so you know Bruce too. Excellent! Hatchet laughed. The other one is Drongo. He's like an ogre. Calm and nice if you behave, but crushes you like a bug if you don't. I like ogres, Oakbud declared. I don't want to be crushed like a bug, Pillskin whined. I'm glad that's clear for everyone then, Hatchet said. This is Oakbud and Pillskin. They're gonna be around. Alright, we're moving on. And he was already marching out of the room with the gnomes. Rage monster! Oakbud screamed again. It was probably meant to be a goodbye. What was that? Bruce asked. Gnomes. Tony shrugged. Of course, naturally, Bruce said, shaking his head. Drongo seemed equally unfazed. Loki didn't even try to not laugh at that. Ju and B were watching a film when they found them. What are those things? Ju asked when she turned around. Ju and B, this is Oakbud and Pillskin, Hatchet said. Ooh, green. Why is she green? Pillskin asked. Is she a vegetable? Oakbud asked. No, I'm not a vegetable, Ju said firmly. B already climbed over the couch to look at the gnomes from a little closer. If she would be a vegetable, we could eat her, Oakbud said. Watch it, Hatchet warned. If you try to bite her, she's gonna bite right back. Bite your ears off. Oakbud gasped. Not my ears, he said, and clamped his tiny hands down on his long ears, trying to hide them. Oh yes, Hatchet continued. Maybe just one ear, and then you will be half-eared Oakbud, the butt of all jokes. I don't want my ears bitten off, Pillskin whined. Then don't bite anyone, Hatchet said. I'm really not following this conversation, Stark said. Don't try to understand the Fae, Loki told him. Just accept their peculiarities. It was a lesson he learned a very long time ago. Oakbud was eyeing B curiously, leaning down a little from Hatchet's shoulder to take a closer look at her. Loki didn't expect B to lean quickly forward and snap her teeth at him. The gnome shrieked and fell off from Hatchet's shoulder. Ju, Hatchet, and even Pillskin laughed right away. B was smirking in that satisfied way of hers. Oakbud quickly ran over to Loki and climbed up his legs and back until he was hanging off of his shoulder, half hiding under his hair. Loki let him. Gnomes were prickly if you refused friendly physical contact. Hatchet told him many times Fae were tactile creatures. Oakbud glared a little. Then he pointed a finger at B. That vegetable girl! Loki just snarled and went back to the couch. Okay, I think I like them, Jiyu said when she stopped laughing long enough to speak. Hatchet hoisted Billskin up to his shoulder as he turned back towards Loki and Stark. The gnome grumbled and yanked at his ear in retaliation to the treatment, so Hatchet squeezed him. Arr! Abuse! Billskin wailed and kicked at Hatchet's head. The elf just turned him upside down, and a moment later the gnome calmed down. Okay, introductions are done. Time to talk business, he said. Bye, bitchy girls! Billskin waved. It was obviously the last straw for Stark because he started laughing so hard that there were tears in his eyes. You need to go to Baba Queen, Billskin said once Loki and Hatchet finished talking about Loki's peculiar situation. Fortunately, it didn't take quite as long to get the gnomes to be a little serious as Loki expected. Big Queen of Alfheim, Hatchet clarified for Stark. I was hoping you could tell me whom I need to speak to here on Midgard, Loki said. Not a good idea, Billskin said. Vix is a poison nymph. Loki frowned. I thought Midgard had a fey king. Oberon's gone, Oakbud said. It was inevitable. Everyone who knew how to use Google knew his name. It was a matter of time before someone used it against him. Then humans started blowing things up and lots of poison nymphs got really strong, Billskin added. Okay, for the rest of the class, those are... Stark asked. Poison nymphs feed upon all things deadly and toxic, Loki said. Most of them live on Muspelheim. All the sulfur and smoke is quite good for them. Oh, also in Svartalfheim, Hatchet added. In poisonous swamps, mainly. Yes, but humans started giving them lots of mess, Billskin said. Pouring all kinds of things in rivers and oceans. Oil, garbage, toxic waste. Then things blew up, Oakbud said. Where does Vix live? Chernobyl? Billskin guessed. Chernobyl? Stark asked. That's the one, Billskin nodded. She has this whole big building sealed off from humans. Lots of poison nymphs in there. Oh, good. Radioactive nymphs. Just what I like to hear. Stark said. She has a daughter that lives on the East Coast. Oakbud added. Slimy girl. Black and oily and very mean. Billskin said. No, I'm not going to deal with poison nymphs, Loki said. Those were not the sort of fae he wanted to associate with. So why Baba Queen then? Hatchet asked. I mean, sure, I know we're better than anyone here on Midgard, but... Because all the fae here on Earth that didn't want to live in cities asked her help to go to other places, Billskin said. And she came here and took them over to the other realms, so she knows fae everywhere, even on Jotunheim. So there were fae on Jotunheim. Loki wasn't sure up until now. To think that they all could have perished had Thor arrived too late to stop him in time. The thought settled like cold lead in his stomach, and he had to swallow and lick his dry lips before he could speak again. What about the Jotnar and the fae that live there? Are they peaceful with one another? Of course, Billskin said, like it should be obvious. Jotnar say that all who live on Jotunheim are the children of Ymir. And the witches are friends with the ice spirits, Oakbud said. That too, Billskin nodded. Witches? Loki asked. On Jotunheim? Billskin looked at him long and hard and maybe a little judgmentally. You need to learn more, he said. That? He couldn't even argue with that. He obviously didn't know enough about Jotunheim. That needed to change, and fast. So, Alfheim it is, Hatchet said. You need to speak with Frey anyway. 2 birds with 1 stone. Yes, Alfheim it is, Loki agreed. The gnomes, surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, didn't feel like going anywhere. At least Hatchet kept an eye on them, so they didn't cause trouble. Too much trouble. They were just loud. But Loki had other things to think about because a lot was at stake. Too many things depended on his trip to Alfheim, so it couldn't go wrong. He knew he couldn't go alone, but he would not risk taking Stark deep into Fae territory. They were going to argue about this, so Loki didn't bring it up just yet. He still had time to figure out the details. He needed to settle something else first, so he told Stark whom he needed to talk to and left him, Hatchet, and the gnomes at the kitchen. Jarvis, contact Thor in the Stark Tower, he said once he was inside their room. He is on his way to his floor, Jarvis said a moment later, so Loki waited. He didn't really know how things between Asgard and Alfheim had been in recent years, but he doubted Frey changed much from the way Loki remembered him. He wasn't sure Thor could help him further, but he had to let him know about this anyway. The display lit up, then finally Thor's face appearing on it.
Loki, it's good to hear from you,
he said. You saw me less than a day ago in person. Loki pointed it out.
If it's so,
Thor said.
What is it then?
I need to go to Alfheim, he said.
Why?
Thor asked. Because it was Frey who told Hatchet that I was missing, so he obviously wants something important from me. Thor looked thoughtful.
Do you know what it could be?
No. Loki shook his head. Did anything noteworthy happen on Alfheim while I was gone?
Not that I know of,
Thor said.
Frey sent mages when father needed help controlling the eternal flame, but nothing else.
There are not many things you would need me for, Loki said. What about Mother? Has she been to Alfheim? Thor looked pleasantly surprised for a moment and smiled before he answered.
All right,
Mother. Loki didn't comment on it.
Yes, once or twice.
Thor nodded.
Never for long. Do you think she may have something to do with it?
She and Frey are still very close, are they not?
Maybe Mother asked him to contact Hatchet,
Thor guessed,
so that he would find you.
Frey told Hatchet that he has need of me, Loki said, so it has to be more than that.
So you intend to help him?
Thor asked, and ask for his counsel in return, Loki said. Thor thought for a moment.
About Jotunheim,
he said. Not a question. Loki nodded. He knows more about the realm than anyone else I could reach in my current situation.
Alfheim is still under Asgard's rule,
Thor said.
Frey would need to hand you over to... Oh, I see. You want me to tell father about this?
Heimdall heard some bits and pieces already, Loki said. He might as well know everything.
That won't be a pleasant conversation.
Thor rubbed his head. I'm sure the Queen will be willing to support your decision, Loki said.
I will go to Asgard first,
Thor said.
But then I will meet you in Alfheim. I want you to stay put in Frey's court until I get there. Remember our agreement.
Yes, you always want to know where I am. Why do you think I called you? Loki knew trust was something he couldn't ask for just yet. At least having to inform Thor about things like this didn't feel like as much of a hassle as he would have imagined.
Very well then,
Thor nodded.
I do believe it is better if I don't avoid speaking with father much longer.
2 days from now, Loki said. That is when I plan to leave.
I'll also leave to Asgard that day then.
Don't forbid you leave sooner than me, Loki said. Thor smiled and chuckled a little.
I'd rather not be too far away from you, he said. Not more than I have to.
Fine, Loki said, but he was almost certain that his annoyance was not real at all.
May I talk with you tomorrow as well?
Thor asked. Loki shrugged, looking away. You just need to tell Jarvis to contact me, or use your phone, he said. Thor smiled, happy and pleased. Loki refused to acknowledge the warmth in his chest because this was ridiculous. He shouldn't feel like this because of something so simple.
Very well. I'll speak with you on the morrow then.
Yes, fine, Loki said. Off you go.
Bye, Loki.
Thor smiled, then the display was gone. Ridiculously simple things. He shook his head, resisting the urge to roll his eyes at himself. He had things to plan, after all.